Thanks for tuning into this week's Stacker Chat. Stacks is smart contracts for Bitcoin, and I'm joined by Muneeb Ali, Stacks founder, for your weekly updates. So our last chat was actually in Miami. Can you share any takeaways from Bitcoin Unleashed and Bitcoin 2022?
Yeah, I think it was great to meet so many familiar faces, like in person, and even kind of like the Stacker Chat, right? I feel like it just feels different to just be there in person and record it with actual community members there. I think the most exciting thing was just the energy level at the event. Like, so many people were so excited about what we were doing, and I feel like especially after COVID, people are missing that personal connection, that being able to like sit down with the people you work with online and just know them in the community. And I think there was great energy there and some amazing surprises. Like, I wasn't expecting like a crash punk to be painted outside the venue, and it just makes kind of like, Bitcoin NFTs real. And obviously it was the Bitcoin week over there. And I think some of the takeaways for me were a little bit like the level of kind of like, passion and enthusiasm within the Stacks community is like through the roof. Like, I think people who understand it, people who get it, that that Bitcoin is kind of like the true form of money, and they've kind of like taken the orange pill and they're sold on it. And then once they understand what Stacks is enabling in the Bitcoin ecosystem, people get very excited about it, right? But at the same time, I don't think that a lot of people within the Bitcoin community or even within the broader crypto industry fully realize that. So I think that was definitely a takeaway, that you would actually meet people at the Bitcoin event who've never heard of Stacks, right? I do think that is something that we as a community need to change. I think especially this year, there needs to be a lot more focus on education, on expanding the size of the community, and people can do small things like, if you are kind of like sold on the thesis and the work that is happening here, you should feel free to talk to kind of like your friends and other people who are in the crypto industry or in Bitcoin, and have discussions about like what Stacks is doing, why is it interesting, and kind of like pull other people in, because I do think there's a lot of magic happening internally, but the scale of that, I think, remains very concentrated. And I do think one big takeaway is that how do we take the message to a broader audience? And obviously Trust Machine is going to play our role in doing that. We are getting some really talented people on the communication and marketing side, but I think the rest of the community and other entities should also pay attention to it. That was definitely a takeaway for me.
Excellent, thank you. Now, back to building, and I'm going to ask this question just to sort of frame the conversation ahead. But what do you see as the opportunity ahead for Web3 on Bitcoin?
I think it's a little bit like one thing that is becoming clear to people now, which I think maybe people who are actively kind of like building on Bitcoin or were more kind of like deep in the Bitcoin ecosystem, it was much more clear to them years ago, is how Bitcoin is the most decentralized and durable thing. Like, people, this message is now catching on that, look, there's 10% inflation happening outside, or some of these other blockchains can be very experimental, and they can get taken down, or like really bad things can happen at the blockchain level for these systems, or they're very heavily centralized, or a few actors can just come in and change a lot of things. But that's not happening with Bitcoin, right? So over time, it's becoming abundantly clear that Bitcoin is different. Bitcoin is very grassroots, very decentralized, very hard to change. Can potentially, if there's like one project out there that can even sustain state level attacks on it, it's likely just Bitcoin, right? Like, probably nothing else. So just like, I think that thing is becoming clear to people, that Bitcoin as money in people's mind is a different category than any other crypto project. And that difference is becoming clear. I think what is absolutely not clear to people is the benefit of Bitcoin as a settlement layer. That if you're building an application, like imagine, somebody's building decentralized Twitter on a much smaller blockchain or a much more centralized blockchain, and you try to build the decentralized Twitter, but in the end, it's kind of semi-centralized anyway, because your underlying blockchain was more centralized, right? So if you're using Bitcoin as a settlement layer, as a foundation for Web3, then everything else you're building on top kind of like automatically benefits from the strong foundations that Bitcoin has. So I think that is one thing that is less clear. And obviously, the first step there is just Bitcoin as programmable capital. Most of the Bitcoin is basically just sitting there, right? And people have kind of like, they've adjusted their narratives accordingly to say, hey, Bitcoin is just for holding. Sure, some people might want to hold Bitcoin, but even if you look at traditional savings account, sure, you don't get a lot of yields on your savings account, but you do get some yields, right? So that capital is not just sitting in the bank. The banks take the capital and deploy it and make a lot of money on it, just so they're giving very small yields to the users. And in a decentralized money world with Bitcoin, if you could get direct yields on your Bitcoin holdings in a non-KYC, trustless, decentralized manner, I think a lot of people would be interested. Maybe not deploy all of their Bitcoin holdings into it, but at different levels of risks and potential rewards. I think Bitcoin as programmable, deployable capital is a huge, huge market that is very, very kind of like underexplored right now, and a lot of people aren't thinking of it that way, right? They're thinking of Bitcoin just as a inflation hedge or a store of value. They aren't thinking of Bitcoin as like programmable money, which it really is.
Great, thank you. And what are some of the goals that you anticipate as being really critical to growth of the Stacks ecosystem over the next 3 quarters, the rest of 2022?
Yeah, I think I've kind of like mentioned this before, but these days my mind is really kind of like honed in on some of these key unlocks. It's a little bit like if you think about, what's the next 10x level unlock? Like, how do we get like 10x more developers here, or any metric that you're tracking? Like, it could be users, could be any other metric. Like, how do we 10x that and keep kind of like growing this ecosystem? Because the size of the opportunity is massive, and a lot of people can agree with that. But then on a day-to-day basis, like, what are the current roadblocks and what needs to be focused on? And it's a decentralized ecosystem, and various people are going to kind of like contribute to that. But at least in my view, I think one key thing is that when people go to newer L1s, like a Avalanche or a Solana, they do have like a much smooth user experience. Like, if you're trying to, withdraw your asset from exchange or do a swap, and that thing happens within seconds, like those systems have made like other trade-offs internally, but at least from a UX perspective, it is a pretty good user experience to the user. And I think we want it to be much more decentralized and like run our nodes on Raspberry Pis and be more like Bitcoin. But then Bitcoin blocks are after every 10 minutes, right now, or longer. So that's one thing. So the best solution, at least in my mind, that can immediately kind of like impact this is hyperchain, where you can start having Solana like performance or even network capacity, and users can experience that. So I think that's definitely number one. And similarly, the other thing is that there might be improvements for like more kind of like stable mining software, because it's a little bit like, because the system is so decentralized, nobody even knows who the miners are. Some miners are running old software. There could be like certain incentives that I think could be tweaked, or certain mining pools that can be made easier, so that we have a more decentralized set of miners, and miners are actually running the latest version of software, and they're processing a lot more blocks, even on the main chain. Even if the high-speed traffic is happening at a hyperchain level, I think it is important that the main chain is very reliable. It can process as many transactions as possible, because people might have seen, like, there's a block in which there are 300 transactions, but then there's a block that has 3. And even the blocks that are packing transactions, there's actually much more capacity that they can do. And those are tweaks in the mining software or other parts of the network stack that can be done. And we don't want this to become like a tragedy of the commons, that because there's no big company responsible for operating the network, nobody is kind of like contributing to better miners and better software and so on. So I think in a very decentralized way, we as a decentralized ecosystem could make progress towards this, whereas mining is very efficient and there's like tons of miners, and it's a very, very decentralized, stable ecosystem. Because imagine if, someday, there are like, a ton of applications on Stacks, and, I'm just throwing some random numbers out there. There's like $100 billion worth of network. It's hard to imagine that that network would be operated with just, like 10 miners or something, right? Like you need to have like a much decentralized, stronger base of network operators who are incentivized and they have the right capabilities and software and incentives for being long-term players in the ecosystem. So I think that thing is important. There are some potential kind of like stacks improvement proposals or SIPs that are coming out that I'm aware of that targets some of that. And then I do think that basically bringing more liquidity to the ecosystem. Like now we're at a stage where some of the very base stuff, like last year when the mainnet was going live, just getting consensus live and just getting smart contracts live was like a big deal. Now the next kind of like stage becomes how much liquidity or how much capital is in these applications. And if you double click on it, that where is the capital going to come from, right? The main thesis is the capital is going to come from Bitcoin, right? So we need much better tooling for people to easily send Bitcoin capital into contracts running on stacks, right? So for example, right now we don't have native Bitcoin wallets. If you are a Bitcoiner, the experience that you would expect to have is like you download a Bitcoin wallet and you can just do a Bitcoin transaction and you are now participating in some sort of a pool, or you do some sort of a swap, or you buy a Bitcoin NFT, right? So I think that's the capital pool that is just sitting there untapped. There have been some interesting things like the Magic Bridge or some Lightning swaps, Allen swaps that come online, but they're kind of like in development mode right now, right? Like there isn't a ton of liquidity there, or the dev tooling is a little bit clunky. So I think more work needs to be done to polish these dev tools, have a bunch of stable liquidity, so that if applications want to use the Magic Bridge or LN swap at very high volumes, they can actually do that. And then we have the right interfaces like Bitcoin wallets, where users can just use Bitcoin directly and pour in liquidity. And then also, if you look at the crypto industry right now, most of the traffic is a little bit like Ethereum is kind of like having problems with gas fees because there's like kind of like too many people trying to use it. And then networks like Polygon or Avalanche or other EVM compatible chains are basically getting much more traffic away from Ethereum, and they're absorbing some of that traffic on their own networks. And I think there's potentially a huge opportunity here where you could get some of those use cases and traffic and bring it directly in the Bitcoin ecosystem. And I think that's kind of like the main thesis. It's a little bit like, if you are moving away from Ethereum, then why would you move to like some other blockchain if you have the option of actually moving to the Bitcoin ecosystem, right? And I think that needs to play out, which means that much better bridges to Ethereum, but also potentially EVM compatibility down the road. I've personally been looking at a proposal where, because these hyperchains can have different environments, execution environments. So the first hyperchain, obviously, it makes sense to have it in Clarity. Clarity is a much safer programming language. It's much easier to do routing between a Clarity-based hyperchain and the main chain. But it's technically entirely possible that another hyperchain instance can have a different execution environment. It could be EVM compatible. And I think that could be a very interesting on-ramp to bring a bunch of traffic that's kind of like overflowing on Ethereum, and people like Satoshiables who are interested in kind of like migrating away from Ethereum to the Bitcoin side. I think just making it super easy for people to do that, so that they can plug in their capital, they can plug in their assets, and easily bring it over to the Bitcoin ecosystem, to the stack. So I think that can be a massive unlock. So it's already kind of like you can see it's a list of things. Some of them are more critical than others. But as an ecosystem, I think if we can make meaningful progress on potentially all of them this year, I think I can almost like envision it that if you make a huge progress on these things, like you're definitely unlocking like a different level of the ecosystem, and I frankly can't wait for it. I think I'm very excited about that.